Wait, that was cool. Wait, that was so cool. What the f— Nilou has finally been released in the Genshin Impact 3.1 patch in the second half. Now, to be honest, she is surprisingly really good, at least in certain very specific scenario. However, she does have many major flaws that we also have to talk about as well. And so this is my first impression of the brand new character, Nilou. And as always, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed already for more video where we talk about characters, meta, and let's get started. To get started, Nilou is going to be played mostly as a Hydro applicator in a Bloom team. Now, of course, you can play her outside of Bloom team as well, such as Nilou National or Nilou Taser, but there isn't really a point of that. The reason is because her A1 talent requires you to have only Danjo and Hydro character in order for it to function. And sure, you can put her into the national team and it will work really well, but that isn't really the point of the character, and at that point, it isn't really any different than other characters. Yeah, that is something you could do if you just really want to play Nilou because you want to see her belly dancing in your party, but it isn't the point of the character, so it is not what we're gonna focus on in today's video, and instead we're just gonna be mainly focused on the intended playstyle for Nilou, which is playing her in Bloom team or only with Danjo and Hydro characters. With that being said, Nilou basically only have like one playable team, and that is mostly gonna be Nilou, Kokomi, Kali, and Danjo main characters. Now you could use Barbara instead of Kokomi here if you don't have Kokomi, but Kokomi is gonna be significantly better, and so it is just much more comfortable to play. And today I actually want to talk about the problem overall as a team rather than the individual characters, because with Nilou only really having one playable team, I think it just makes a lot more sense to talk about the overall problem as a team instead. Nilou actually doesn't have meaningful personal damage at all, and you can actually just not level her talent at all, and you can in fact leave them at like level 1, 1, and 1. Mostly what you have to do is just stack HP to proc the A4 Taser talent, and that's all really you have to do. Her talent level is just not really meaningful. The increase is very marginal. You go from like 4.67% to like 5% HP, which is like 200 damage increase per talent. It's just not really meaningful. Overall, her main focus as a character is gonna be these two passive that allow you to convert your Bloom into something called the Bountiful Core to do a bunch of massive damage instead. To be very honest, Nilou could be really strong in the right situation, namely in AoE situation like free plus enemy, where the enemy are tightly grouped up so that they can take a lot of Bloom damage altogether. For example, in the current Abyss Troll free, you have 4 enemies that are tightly grouped up, and Nilou can see performing really strong over there. The reason why Nilou is really strong in AoE is because you can apply your Hydro and Danjo to multiple enemies at once, which means you can be rapidly creating Bloom reaction that would trigger a really ridiculously strong AoE, doing a bunch of damage and having just a really massive area of effect. Pretty much how it works is that every single enemy can create a Bloom, and then each of this Bloom can hit every single enemy as well. Do keep in mind that you can only do 2 instead of Bloom damage within 0.5 seconds, but with good enough Danjo and Hydro application to consistently trigger Bloom, you'll just be consistently proccing a lot of Bloom across your entire enemy range and just overall doing a bunch of massive AoE damage. And to be honest, Nilou could potentially be one of the strongest AoE characters we have in the game, except with the many drawbacks that she have. But you can actually kind of see that being played out really well in the overworld, where in the overworld gaming, enemies are generally tightly spawned together, in addition to the fact that they just don't have a lot of HP. So what you can do in the overworld of Nilou is just to spam your elemental skill to trigger the status, click on your Danjo characters for some random Danjo application, and all your enemies just get— what the f— which is really good because all you do is cast 2 elemental skill or free and every single enemy die. But that's only applicable to the overworld. Unfortunately, for the Genshin Impact meta endgame like the Spiral Abyss, that's not really the case. Now, even though Nilou team could have really strong AoE performance, unfortunately it kind of lack in a single target case. One of the major reasons is because our current characters in this party is just not very good individually. They just don't really do a lot of damage. Danjo main character's damage is kind of Kali damage kind of Kokomi damage kind of alright, and then Nilou personal damage is kind of so overall you just don't really have a lot of good individual damage from their kit. And then consists with the fact that in single target you get a lot less Bloom since there's only one single enemy that you can react lack of, single target damage just overall kind of suffer in that aspect. With that being said, even in AoE scenario, this team have a few massive drawback that I must talk about. The first one is that while it does work really well in tightly grouped up AoE scenario, the problem here is that with the lack of an anemo character in your party, or just a grouper in general like Sucrose, Venti, or Kazu, it could be difficult to get yourself into that tightly grouped up scenario since you don't have a grouper. In the current Spiral Abyss patch where miHoYo tailorly made it for Nilou, the enemy are spawned directly on top of each other so that this problem is a lot less observable. However, in the past or even in the futures, miHoYo has created Abyss where the enemy are just really spread out. For example, in a chamber where there's a Mirror Maiden on one side and then a Citizen Mage on the other side. And since they teleport all over the places, now having a reliable grouper like Venti or Kaza will make it so that you really suffer when it comes to trying to create tightly grouped up an environment. You can kind of observe that in the current 12-1 chamber as well, where the enemy doesn't spawn grouped and suddenly your power level just kind of go down by a lot since it is difficult to ensure your bloom start hitting every enemy at that case, or even it's difficult to ensure that you're even applying element onto every single enemy since your overall application radius is just not that high, especially with Kali Elemental Burst. Kali Elemental Burst is so small in its overall radius that unless your enemy are tightly grouped up, it honestly just isn't gonna apply damage to every single enemy, and that is just one of the problem with not having a grouper. The secondary problem of not having a grouper is that it make you really suffer against really mobile enemy, which can be seen in the second half of the 12-1 chamber. In the second half of the 12-1 chamber, you have these two Emerald enemy that are kind of mobile that they kind of get over everywhere. With a character like Kazu or Venti, you can somewhat restrict their movement to ensure that they are at least relatively in the same place. For example, maybe the enemy dash away, but then you use Kazu to quickly bring them back. So at least you can kind of ensure you have strong AoE power in that sense. Because you don't have a Kazu in your party, that's not an option. And with how Kali Elemental Burst, DMC Elemental Burst, and how Kokomi Elemental Skill the Jellyfish are all stationary deployable, which means that it is difficult to move them once you have deployed them, sometimes the enemy can just walk out of your effective area and therefore you just completely stop applying element onto them, which is another big problem. Unfortunately, with the way you apply element in this team, the bloom ownership in this team is very non-deterministic, which means that it is uncertain which character is triggering bloom at any given moment. And so what kind of gonna happen is that you have to build elemental mastery on all your characters, including your travelers, your Kali, and your Kokomi as well. In addition to running elemental mastery on all your character though, you're also gonna have to run energy recharge since this team overall does have a huge amount of energy problem. You're gonna have to make sure that their elemental bursts are available as soon as you need it, so you're gonna have to build a massive amount of ER, potentially with multiple Phoneus weapon in your party. For reference, currently I have over 200% elemental mastery recharge on both my Traveler and Kali, and sometimes I do run into energy problems still. It is highly recommended that you just run Phoneus weapon on all of these characters to make sure that you don't run into any energy problem. Or if you are a gacha gamer on the gacha weapon banner, you could consider running Cyphos on your Nilou as well. Unfortunately, since you have to build full elemental mastery on all your character, that also just means that the rest of their kit is just not gonna do that much. For example, on Kokomi, since her healing scale of max HP, but you're going for elemental mastery instead of max HP, then the amount of shit that she's gonna be healing is overall gonna go down, which is gonna be a problem because Bloom team actually takes self damage. During my playtest, I found Nilou team to be quite vulnerable to taking damage, mostly because you're gonna be spamming Bloom and each Bloom is gonna self damage you. But in addition to the fact that because Kokomi is building full elemental mastery now and you heal a lot less, overall I found myself just dying a lot, especially to enemy that do a lot of damage during my playtest, which kind of feels bad. Unfortunately, there just isn't really a lot of ways to get around the problem of your team being vulnerable to damage because you're required to only bring Danjo and Hydro characters. It isn't like you can just suddenly bring Zhongli in and solve the problem, as you, well, even though Zhongli have a massive defensive shield, you actually can't bring any Geo character in, which could be a nightmare for some people who are really dependent on Zhongli. And so there isn't a lot of way to get around that problem. You could bring HP artifact on Kokomi instead of elemental mastery to trade for damage. That is fine, but it doesn't completely solve your problem either. It does make you a little bit more tankier. Now, there is a very specific reason why I wanted to make this first impression about Nilou's team instead of herself, because I actually think Nilou individually could be regarded as a really good or really strong character. And it's really the fact that restriction on the team that you can bring really drag her down, because a lot of these problems come from the fact that we just don't have a lot of options to bring. We don't have character that can solve these problems, which is why these problems might exist. Namely, the two danger characters that you are forced to run are just not very good, and I can foresee Nilou being much better with future release of future danger characters like danger healers, danger grouper maybe. I don't know if they're gonna make one, but if they will make one, it will be a lot better. The problem with Nilou is just that at the current moment, you have to run exactly these 3 party members, and even then there are just many problems that I mentioned throughout the entire video. And even when you do run it, it is only good in one exact scenario, which is AoE scenario where the enemy are tightly grouped up together for some reason without a grouper. It is kind of like Nilou could be surprisingly really good in this once in a blue moon scenario, but just kind of not very good everywhere else. To be very honest, I think Nilou individually as a character has a really amazing kit, could even be argued to be really strong. The fact that you can bring 2 free characters and still get a really promising results in certain scenario actually show that Nilou has a really strong kit. These 2 passive talent are actually really strong, that I can kind of understand why miHoYo limited to just danger or hydro, because if you were to able to bring a Anemo characters like Kazu or Venti as your grouper and start solving some of these problems, Nilou could honestly just be one of the strongest characters in the game for AoE scenario, just triggering a massive amount of bloom very consistently. But the problem is that as good as that is, miHoYo decided to not do that, and that is just really limiting. Of course, you don't have to run those exact 3 members. You can run Barbara instead of Kokomi, but in my personal opinion, after playtesting Barbara, I think Barbara is just a lot worse to play than Kokomi. It's really just feels suffering, as Barbara just have a lot worse hydro application. Her healing is not even fully up like Kokomi is. Her healing on her elemental skill has a 15-second duration, but with a 32-second cooldown. I mean that about half the time, you're not even gonna be able to do anything on your elemental skill since it's not gonna be available. And if you really want to, you can actually get really promising single target results with something like double hydro Nilou or even hyper bloom Nilou. Both of these are actually really solid in terms of single target damage. But at that point, it pretty much ties into my first point that I made in this video, which is at that point you're not really playing Nilou for her kit, but rather just playing Nilou for the purpose of she belly dancing on your screen, which is, to be honest, I completely fine. But just remember, like, as a overall character kit perspective, it's not very meaningful since you're not using any aspect of her kit at all, but she rather just exists on your screen to dance around. Honestly, I think Nilou has a really good kit that could potentially be really powerful, except the fact that it restricts you into drafting a certain team, and in specific, that team is just not very strong right now, really hinder her potential. To be honest, I think Nilou could be surprisingly really strong with the right teammate, but we just don't have those available at the current moment. We're waiting for brand new Danjo characters, brand new Hydro characters that are more suitable. After all, Nilou team is one of the very first team in Genshin Impact that is fully focused on doing transformative reaction. In this team, the only thing that you care is your bloom rate, which means that the only thing you really care is your elemental application rate. In the future, when we get better elemental applicator, like maybe a Danjo Callus user, as Callus user are really good at applying the element, Nilou could see a 180 turn because that's all we really need. But as always, I highly advise you to not roll based on future potential. Keep in mind that character like Xiao is still waiting for a suitable character to pair with Xiao to this day, and we don't know if Nilou is actually gonna get suitable character in the future. So my current recommendation, unfortunately, has to be that you should skip Nilou and wait for a rerun to see if we do get those good pairing characters. But yeah, unfortunately, if I were to give an early rating right now, I think I will actually put her at a 2 out of 5 value rating, which means that she is not worth pulling for unless you really like her and doesn't really care about all of those meta things. You just really care for her design, like belly dancing and stuff. Otherwise, if you somewhat care about meta string, like you kind of care about the string of the characters, I would again highly recommend you just pulling when it's rerun to see how it goes. With that being said, hopefully that doesn't disappoint too many people. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.